Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Fill in the Gaps in Microsoft 365 Data Protection. This event is presented in partnership with our friends at Quest. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar today. My name is David Davis of ActualTech Media, and I'm glad to be serving as your moderator and host for today's event. As always, with our ActualTech Media events, we want these to be educational. We're all former IT professionals here at ActualTech Media, and we know how tough it can be out there in the world of enterprise IT. You've got threats coming at you from every direction, it seems. And for anyone out there leveraging Microsoft 365, you need to know the gaps and how to better protect your data to make sure if there is some sort of malicious activities or just maybe a user accident of some kind, you need to be able to get that data back and get it back quickly. And that is the topic of today's event. We encourage your questions there in the questions pane of your audience console. Many of you have already said hello and good afternoon and Happy New Year, and we appreciate that. But we also want your technical questions. We even have a best question prize to help encourage those questions. So I'll be talking about that here in just a moment. But first, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a number of resources covering today's topic that will provide additional information. You'll find the backup and recoverability of Microsoft 365 data guide, a resource on protecting Microsoft 365 with Quest NetVault. There is a paper there on enterprise data protection, backup acceleration, deduplication, and replication, and as well as a number of other resources. So make sure that you check those resources out, again, in the Handouts tab. At the end of the webinar today, I have the pleasure of announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card prize. If you're watching this live, of course, we'll be announcing that. If you're watching this on demand or a recording, then that prize drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions for the drawing can be found there in the Handouts tab as well. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our best question prize. This is for an additional gift card, an Amazon $50 gift card. Of course, you must ask a question to be entered into the drawing and meet the ActualTech Media prize terms and conditions. All right, so with that, it's time to kick off today's event. I'm excited to introduce you now to our expert presenter. Welcome back. He's been on many Quest webinars with me in the past. His events are always educational. We always answer a ton of questions from the audience. I know this is a hot topic. I'm excited to introduce you to Adrian Moir, Technology Strategist in the CTO office at Quest. Adrian, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here again, David, and Happy New Year to you and everybody else that's on the call.
Absolutely. Happy New Year. Take it away, Adrian.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, David. So let's get going. I guess our topic is kind of an interesting one as people kind of move and grow into the space that Microsoft 365 technology offers. And we've seen a lot of change and growth the last couple of years, for obvious reasons. But what I wanted to do is just to give you a kind of a broad aspect and outline of how big that's got, and where some of the ideas and thoughts are. Some of the areas where the gaps are, where you might want to think about protecting data. And then we'll look at some technologies and some deployment scenarios. So we'll kind of do the whole thing from the big picture down to actually getting this sorted out. Right, so let's start up with a first kind of section here. Is kind of the what, where, and why, just to kind of understand what it is that is happening out there. So, Microsoft 365 data, it is pretty much everywhere when you look at the ability for its attachment to devices, and you think about the users that are using this. It's become ubiquitous within an enterprise. There's elements of it that you could use personally as well. And the data itself isn't kind of segregated like you would have had in a traditional data center with a bunch of servers. It's changed that. So, the most visible and common instances of Microsoft 365 data are obviously things like Exchange emails, files stored in OneDrive, but they're far from the only ones. So you have things, offline access to Microsoft 365 data includes SharePoint data. OneDrive cache files stored in local directories on laptops and mobile devices. So think about that kind of stuff that's kicking around too. All of these kind of data sources, as well as additional data sources in your on-premises environment, if you've still got that too, you've still got to juggle that too. So they should all be protected by a comprehensive third-party application. Now, just like any data, we have best practices around protecting it, where you want to store it, how long you're going to keep it, and for whatever reasons you need to keep it for, whether they're governance reasons or compliance reasons. It can be different for everybody. Data is still data. Should still be treated as such, and it should still be protected as such, just like you would any other kind of solution set. And we'll drive into why you need to do that. So if you think while this is kind of common methods that we have in here for using things like OneDrive, people think, oh, that's good for a backup, and we'll be covering that a little bit later. Although retrieving kind of locally saved files is becoming less typical, one would hope if you're using a cloud solution, finding the data anywhere it exists, whether it's in cloud or on premise on a user's laptop or mobile device, is kind of critical when you get into those things that are kind of like legal discovery, regulatory compliance. This can include responding to things like data subject access requests or GDPR requests, all that kind of stuff. You want to be able to go and find. Understanding the structure that this kind of works in Microsoft 365 is one angle. The other angle, of course, is to ensure that if you need the data, you've got it, and you don't have to go and dig things out or find that you haven't got it. So we're gonna move on a little bit further, and I just wanted to show a few figures that have kind of come up recently in terms of the whole Microsoft thing. How big is Microsoft 365? It's something that isn't talked about a lot, but you can kind of get the information from their quarterly calls that they have. So we're going to start with the users, the endpoints, the things that attach into this kind of thing. If we just go and count the number of devices there, so we've got now 1.3 billion Windows 10 active devices out there around the globe. So effectively, those are all potential access points into Microsoft 365 technology. We then get to having 145 million daily Microsoft Teams users. Now, that one always scares me when I think about the things that I see go wrong with Teams on a regular basis. So there's 145 people every day, 145 million people every day that are using Teams. Now we kind of get into the interesting stuff. There's 300 million paid Office 365 seats. Now that's the personal stuff, the home things that are not corporate. And then we get into the kind of the enterprise side of things, the corporate stuff. We get into the subscribers. And that is now standing at just over 50 million subscribers. Now you think 50 million corporation subscribers and the number of users they have, it's big. And you think about how this whole solution has to work, how it has to respond, how it has to store things. There's a level of complexity here that we've probably never thought about underneath the skin of that whole Microsoft 365 piece. So just to give you a view, this is a big thing. This is something that's significant. And the reasons that we kind of talk about some things a bit later on are kind of driven by this size and scale that they have to deal with. We'll cross that little bridge when we come to it. So first things, we talk about this quite a lot, actually. Why are we talking about protecting data in a SaaS solution? What's wrong with it, just living out there? Isn't it safe? Well, you could say that you're obfuscating your own technology stack out of your data center and you're using somebody else's. However, with Microsoft 365 and other SaaS solutions, they fall under the role of having a shared responsibility model. And this is really important because it starts to segregate what you're responsible for. And if you look on the table on the left-hand side there, you can see the on-prem stuff, the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then finally software as a service. You can look at who has the ownership of doing which particular pieces. And throughout all of those solution sets, all of those platforms and those methodologies, one at the top, data classification and accountability, is owned by the cloud customer. That's the data. It's up to you to deliver that. Client and endpoint protection as well, if you're looking at that kind of stuff too. It's not going to be delivered wholly by the SaaS solution. Same with the identity and access management. They give you a construct to work within, but it's up to you to manage it. So if we think about all of this, the things that you're going to have to touch in this SaaS solution, the primary key thing here is the data is your responsibility. So let's kind of move the table out a little bit and think Microsoft gives you a service level agreement on the performance and availability of that service. That's the application and the infrastructure. And that's it. That's where it stops. That's the construct they give you. That's the service. You then go utilize that in whichever way you want. And of course, when you then get to put data onto that, well, what do we do about protecting that data? Just like any other data that you've had in a data center, it still needs to be looked after in the same way. We still would apply best practices. All because it's somewhere else now doesn't mean to say it has gone away. And there have been lots of instances within the industry about people actually having issues and causing problems and doing things that they shouldn't quite have done in the way they did. And it can have consequences, because what you're looking at now is something that is no longer single server sets. So, we were used to Exchange, we were used to SharePoint servers, we were used to file servers. They were all segregated to a certain point. And you could go and manage them quite simply. Now we have the interlink things around things like Teams, interlinks into all sorts of places. It actually works with chunks of Exchange. It works with SharePoint. There's all sorts of stuff. Its files gets put into OneDrive. There's all of this interlinking throughout that service that we didn't traditionally have. So there's a level of complexity here that's going to really kind of drive the way we have to think about this when we're looking at the data sets itself. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this that probably everybody's wondering, saying, where are the gaps? What am I missing? So let's talk about them. Talk about some of the risks and some of the issues that you can have and some of the things you can think about, some of the things you've probably thought about already, thinking, yeah, that's enough, that'll be fine. I might be bursting your bubble a little bit today. So let's think about this. I've got an environment here, a tenant that's got Exchange, Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. Fairly straightforward. I've got a bunch of data in there. Pretty much the business runs on it. Now, if you're anything like me, I'm on Teams all day. I use SharePoint all day. OneDrive's ticking away in the background and my emails keep coming through. It's constantly always there doing something. So if we now think about some of the risks to data we've had, I get questions quite a lot actually about the first one, the insider threat, the disgruntled employee. There are a couple of things you can do around this. One is to automate your leaving policies and getting people off of your systems in terms of access. If you don't trust the person to be in your business, if they've decided to move on, then take them out of your business. A really interesting one I get asked quite often is that we've got some sensitive documents, but we don't want our administrators to be able to view them. Well, at that point, I'd say if you don't trust your administrators, then should they really be an administrator? There's a level of inherent trust there. So insider threats, they're still there. They can be acted upon, especially with those people that have elevated access privileges. Well, they can do quite a bit of damage. I mean, they might get sued afterwards or whatever, but the damage can be done, and that kind of hurts. Then everybody's favorite that we're all talking about pretty much all the time, every time I talk to customers, it's ransomware. It's this kind of pernicious stuff that's floating around that may well invade. We just don't know when it might arrive. What damage will it do? No idea. So we have to prepare for it. And I will always say with ransomware, prevention is better than cure, because it's just the better thing to have. Recovering data from a backup after a ransomware attack, that's a cure. It's not prevention. It forms part of a layered defense for your business, absolutely. But you should have all sorts of things up the front to actually stop this stuff coming in. And a lot of this stuff comes down to training. I know it's one thing we do within our business inside Quest. We actually send emails that are kind of internal phishing to see who clicks on what, to see how far they might go. So some interesting things you might consider doing there. Now, the last one, accidental deletion. Not as bad as it used to be, I have to say. There are mechanisms within 365 that actually help with that kind of accidental deletion. One of which is obviously the recycle bin, but we're going to come to that in a minute. I need to click this forward a bit more. There we go. So insider threats, potential for permanent data loss, absolutely. Well, ransomware attacks, it's going to be somewhat annoying, because especially if you get a ransomware attack on an endpoint, this is very important here. They've got OneDrive, it goes encrypts everything, and that then gets synced up to OneDrive. And you're probably thinking, oh yeah, but they'll have versions of files. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. So you've got issues with ransomware. You've also got the issues around accidental kind of deletion as well to think about. Now, that recycle bin has a policy associated with it, somewhere between 30 and 93 days. 93 days is the maximum that you can keep things in the recycle bin. If somebody purges the recycle bin after they've just deleted your data, bye-bye, it's gone. It is, it's not retrievable at that point. Microsoft will say, no, you can't have that back. It's really gone. Now, lots of people saying, well, if I want to keep things for a long time, I'll use a retention policy. Now, we used to call that on hold, and it's now moved to retention policies, and they've changed that. I'm going to do a little bit on retention policies in a minute. One significant event around a retention policy. But again, all of these things, like the recycle bin, a retention policy, a legal hold or a governance. The key thing to remember here is it's still one set of data. It's still one copy of data sat in front of you. Even if things are in the recycle bin, it's one copy of data. You might think, oh, it's tucked away. I mean, how many people use their recycle bin on their desktop as a backup? We just don't. It's not the right place to do it. It's not taken the data away from the platform and stored it securely somewhere else. That's the best practice. So thinking you've got the recycle bin, it's great, but you're going to have issues with it if you want to do wider things with it. It's not classed as a backup solution. So the accidental deletion, yeah, it's kind of handy, but it has a limited search functionality. It has a limited retention period, 93 days if you set it to the maximum. And it can be automatically purged. If it's less than 93 days, if somebody decides to set it to 30 and you're thinking it's all at 93, 1 month later you've lost your data and you think, oh, actually, I might need some of that. It'll disappear. So there are a few little things to kind of get through around that aspect. So I don't know whether you got any questions around that, David, or not.
Yeah, absolutely, Adrian. You've been really on a roll here, educating us on the many gaps there in Microsoft 365 protection. And I think you answered this question already that came in from Bashir, who said, why would I need a third-party data protection software? Doesn't Microsoft protect data within its cloud already? And you clearly defined, not quite. There are many gaps in that protection. But here's another good question. They're asking, if the Microsoft 365 data is deleted, we've got the recycle bin there. Why can't I just undelete it?
You can undelete it. You can, if you think, if somebody's malicious enough to delete all of your users' data, and you're in a company that has 1,000 users, you're going to sit there and undelete 1,000 users' data, and that scenario gets even worse if they've been encrypted with ransomware, and you think you're going to get, I just get all the versions back from the previous version. You can't do that in bulk. It's a one person, one task per file. It's hard. And this is the key thing here. While you might be able to get the data back, how long is it going to take you? How long are you not going to have that data available? How long does it impact your business, or how long does it impact the reputation of the company? So there's many things around there that are things to think about. And the question around, does Microsoft back it up? They don't. No, it's interesting. So if we go back to an Exchange example, when we had Exchange servers internally, they introduced a technology called database availability groups, which made replica copies throughout how many iterations you want. And everybody said, great, we'll never have to back up Exchange ever again. And I don't think I came across anybody that ever stopped backing up Exchange. In fact, a lot of them asked for technology to go and back it up from one of the replica copies to actually reduce impact on production. So the problem doesn't go away. And interestingly enough, database availability groups are also used in Exchange Online, and they do exactly that. So Microsoft is still doing that. it's kind of interesting. But Microsoft's service level agreement, they're primarily intended to protect Microsoft rather than you. And this is the key thing to understand here. Its service level agreements only apply to data that Microsoft loses, not data that you lose. Recovery capabilities for basic and mid-level plans are kind of limited. We've talked about the recycle bin piece already. Even Microsoft states in its SLA. Now I've written this down because I can quote this. It's actually available in their service level agreement. Microsoft state, and I quote this: "We recommend that you regularly back up your content and data that you store on the services or store using a third-party application and service." So they are recommending for you to go and back up your data with something else, because they are not responsible for it. If they have an outage where the storage decides to go completely, what are you going to do? Microsoft's not going to do anything about that. They're not going to get your data back. They'll just say, service is back up and running. Sorry, we couldn't recover the data sets. So it's there to think about. So
Absolutely.
I mean, it does have some things in there that help, but not as much as you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as simple as, in Windows, the recycle bin, just clicking, put the data back.
No.
You make a great point there. There's a whole lot more complexity to it. You have ransomware. At what point, do you need to restore that data from? You can't just restore it in bulk. So great points. There's another good question here. Does Microsoft 365 offer an edition or a version that does include data protection?
No. In a word, no. There is no extra that you can buy with that. It is as it is, which is, I guess, why we're talking to you today. Otherwise, we wouldn't be.
Absolutely,
there isn't anything.
Okay. Yeah, there's lots of great questions coming in. We'll save the rest of them, for a little bit later in the presentation, and I'll hand it back to you, Adrian.
We'll
Thank you.
We got that. You're welcome. Right. Let's crack on and get to the next piece. Now, this is an interesting one. This is public knowledge as well, so I'm happy to share this with you. It's an intriguing one. As we always usually say, back in the 80s, we used to say, to err is human, to really foul things up, you need a computer. Well, let's flip that around the other way now. This happened to KPMG, and they were changing some of their, should we say, policies. And it was a human error, effectively. They wanted to actually apply some policy changes to a specific account. Instead, they applied it to the entire business. And it resulted in the deletion of chat history. Now, what you might think, well, okay, chat history, maybe that's not important. But when you think about compliance records for something that's, a company like KPMG, it's kind of, they probably would need it back. And the problem was that deleted data set was for 145,000 users. So globally, KPMG lost all of their chat history. There is nothing out there in terms of what Microsoft provide for recovering that. It doesn't drop into a recycle bin. It just, you change that, you get that retention policy incorrect, and it goes. That's it. It's gone. So there are elements inside here where things aren't protected. If you create a SharePoint site within Teams and you go and delete it, it doesn't drop into a recycle bin like you would a normal SharePoint service. It's gone. It's disappeared. So there are elements inside that whole Microsoft 365 construct. The major ones are covered for recycle bin. Some of the bits aren't. And if you're requiring, that governance of chat, then it's kind of difficult. So Teams compliance records for personal chats they're actually captured in user mailboxes. These records, they're used by content searches. So if you ever search for something in Outlook and you see something in your conversations folder pops up, that's what this is. So that would disappear. So as I said, they're used by content searches, e-discovery cases, other data governance features like communications compliance policies. So the retention policies to control Teams data, they actually use the Exchange Managed Folder Assistant, believe it or not. Now, this is where I'm saying all these products are all tangled together. So they use the managed folder assistant to process the compliance records in mailboxes according to policy settings. Exchange Online will then synchronize those and the deletions made by that assistant to process compliance records in mailboxes. And any deletions made by that, they'll remove those compliance records from the mailboxes into Teams, which then removes the item from its data store. Now, these items are actually stored in an Azure Cosmos DB. Excuse me. So again, you've got another product sitting under there, which is Azure Cosmos. So that's where that compliance data is set. So, the cycle completes when the deletion synchronized from the Teams to the clients, and then it disappears out of view and it's gone. So from a simple change in a policy, it's quite in depth, and you can go down the rabbit hole quite a long way. And all of a sudden you're thinking, well, how am I going to recover all of this? I don't know anything about Azure Cosmos DB. I don't know anything about the Exchange Online synchronization using MFA. How does that work? And this is where a recovery solution can actually come in and say, it's going to be quicker for us to just put all of this back for you, rather than you trying to pick out bits and pieces. It's very complex, and there's a lot of interlinking, and there's a lot of permissions being granted for particular users for particular areas. So it's not simple. So simple change, big impact, hard to get back from that. All right. So here's the one that's always contentious. I always have lots of conversations about this, and there's some interesting stuff around this. So OneDrive is not a backup. That's a contentious thing to say, because people will say, I use OneDrive, it copies my data up to cloud. Yes, it does, but it also synchronizes your data in real time. When you've got your PowerPoint application open and you've got your auto save on, it is doing that up to OneDrive at the same time. Any files that get corrupted, encrypted, changed, those changes get reflected in OneDrive. Here's the interesting piece now. And I've just gone through this scenario. I've just had a new laptop, which was great. My IT team said, it's time you need a new machine. They sent it out to me. We use modern desktop, so it's really easy for me to set up. And away we go. Now, what was kind of interesting is that all of my files that I've been working on for the last couple of years were all still available in OneDrive, but it doesn't automatically bring them all down. It now actually, I click on one, it downloads, it opens. Unless I tell my client machine to go and actively pull down all of that data, it doesn't. So here's the scenario now. You've got two scenarios here. If somebody has got all of their data on their laptop and nothing in OneDrive, they lose their laptop, they lose their data. That's problem number one. So OneDrive gets around that and says, okay, you've lost your laptop, but you've got a copy in OneDrive. That's great. Okay, get my new laptop, set it up. And now I look at my files. I can open them and go and do that. But most of them are left up in OneDrive. They're not pulled down to my laptop. I no longer have two copies of that data. I no longer have a way to recover my data. If it gets messed up in OneDrive, it's gone. There's nothing there for me. Okay, if it hits the recycle bin, I might be able to get something back. But if it doesn't, and if I don't notice it, because it's not locally on there, I've not been acknowledged about stuff being there, if it goes, it's gone. So OneDrive, it's not really a backup. Think of it as a synchronizing cloud extension to your laptop. That's what it's about. And you can get infected files that can sync across those sync points too. You've got limited recovery points. There's lots of versions, and you can configure it up. But if you want 500 versions of every file for your 1,000 or your, if you like KPMG, 145,000 users, that's an awful lot of storage space you're going to consume, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So each time you add in retention policies and make things longer and add versions, you're going to be using more storage, and they're going to bill you more for that. So that's one thing to watch. If you start cranking up the retention stuff, it does impact, especially around SharePoint, because that you have to go and buy extra storage for that. So that's one to watch for. So OneDrive is not a backup, fairly subjective, fairly contentious. It's useful, but it's not the final solution that you should be looking for. All right.
And one question here from the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're asking, when it comes to OneDrive, correct me if I'm wrong here. Say you get a ransomware infection and you want to restore from, 5 days ago all your
Uh-huh.
files. You can't just
Hmm.
restore everything from 5 days ago.
No,
Isn't that true?
no, you can't. So you if you wanted to restore the files, you'd be going and look at the versions, and then you'd have to go and look at the version for each and every file for each and every user in a manual process. Now you could probably write a PowerShell script to go and iterate that, as long as you get that right and don't do something that damages it even more. And of course, if you're pulling things back, you could potentially also run the risk of reinfection again if you don't quite get that right and you pull one back and away you go again. So caution.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're talking about Microsoft 365 data protection here. There's a lot more to Microsoft 365 than just what you can put in OneDrive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So we've talked about the size, the scope, and everything else. Let's talk a little bit about some technology. Now, it's I work for Quest, so guess what? You're going to learn a bit more about the Quest technology set. However, some of this might chime and say, actually, do you know what? We need to go and look at this. So, and I get lots of questions about this, and I saw a question in the list as well about granular recovery and what can we do around this, and I'm going to answer that one in particular as we go through this. So, solution we're going to look at today is called NetVault Plus for Microsoft 365. Now, NetVault is an extensive set of tools, technology that allows us to actually back up more than just Microsoft 365. We'll look at that a little bit later, but this is going to be our focus. We're not going to stray away from this. So we're going to actually dive into this in quite an in-depth way. Right, so let's have a quick look at our first piece. Let's create ourselves a tenant. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. When we create that tenant, here are our services. So we've got them all here. Now, one I haven't spoken about already is Azure AD. Now, we've kind of touched on all the other bits, but we've not really come across that piece yet. And this is where it gets really very interesting because, as I said earlier, all of these pieces are interlinked. They all talk to each other. We just heard that the chat stuff is actually stored and managed by Exchange and then stored in Cosmos DB. Well, I mean, how much more complex could that be when you're trying to work out how to put that kind of stuff back? So there's all this interlinking going on here. And we have only one particular major method to allow us to get to this. There are two ways of actually moving data in and out of Azure, specifically around the Exchange data. Primarily, and the only thing we now use is a Graph API driven solution. Now, CSOM is particular for SharePoint because it's a little bit different. But primarily, we use the Graph API, which is Microsoft's own API. Now, before they still have a little bit something, that the Exchange Web Services stuff, the EWS, that's specific. They're actually deprecating that. In 2018, they said, do you know what? We're not going to develop that any further. And they've actually started deprecating services from that API. That's why we moved to Graph API. We were actually the first vendor to go to market with a Graph API solution for Microsoft 365, and it has been growing since then. We regularly talk to Microsoft. In fact, I had a recent conversation with them, and it was an interesting one. They said, you're doing everything through best practices that Microsoft would expect, but they looked at it and went, it's probably one of the fastest solutions out there as well. We actually do have some patents on our technology. We've done some really kind of special stuff with this. So let's think about introducing our NetVault technology into there. It talks to Graph API and gives me a whole slew of information coming out that I could look to protect. Now, this little picture here, I haven't expanded everything because it would just be off page. But you've got Outlook at the top. You can open up the users piece and you'll see all the mailboxes. You can also pick it up from groups. So if you've got a bunch of groups that you want to go and pick up and back up their mailboxes as a group of people, you can set groups up and go and do it that way too. So we're kind of flexible. OneDrive, as you can see, is in there as well. You see all the users in there. You can go and select those. SharePoint one, I always kind of open that one up. It's kind of interesting. You get to see all of those sites in there. And we can protect all of that content. We're going to look at the recovery stuff as well in a finer detail too. Then you've got all the team stuff down the bottom there. So you've got all those teams sat in there as well. Now, what's really nice is that you can also have include and exclude patterns added into here as well. So if you don't want to back up, the junk folders in the email stuff, you can exclude those and don't protect them. Or you can say, I want to exclude everything but this one and go and protect that. You can even set it up, say, I want some extra protection for this particular user because he's very high profile in the business. Well, he'll have his own set of backup jobs, and we can keep that really kind of looked after nicely. But just by using the Graph API, we can query all of that content and actually start thinking about it. So let's expand this a little bit further. Let's expand on what the technology can achieve.
Adrian, I'm curious, you mentioned how this is a patented protection architecture. What is it that makes this so unique that it was eligible for a patent?
It's the way in which we approach the data connectivity and data movement. And that's as far as I'm going to say on that, because there's some secret sauce inside there.
Okay.
But you can go and find the patent and read it if you so wish. It was granted, I think, July 2020, I think it was. So, yeah. Very
cool.
Okay, so let's look at this. We've got our one Azure tenant. Now, a lot of times when we're dealing with this kind of stuff, you've only got one tenant to deal with. Great. What about happens with the mergers and acquisitions? You acquire another company and you come along and they've also got an Azure tenant. And you're thinking, how do I do this? How do I migrate from one to the other? How do I concatenate those two together? Well, Quest has some great tools for that. You can go and look at those as well on the Quest website for around this kind of migration technology. However, there's a little trick that we've got here with this as well. So if we have our second piece in here, our second tenant here, I can then install NetVault there too, and I can back up from multiple tenants. I'm not fixed to any one individual tenant. In fact, from the single access point, I can actually protect multiple tenants. And then I can stream the data to wherever I want to store it in either our deduplication technology, which we'll talk a little bit about later. We can put it into tape if you so wish. If you want that ultimate air gap, we'll support that too. We've also got intelligent cloud tiering and cloud archiving solutions as part of this too. But it gets really interesting at this point because we also have the ability to recover data from one tenant into another. So if you wanted to actually say, I need a copy of this data set from the old tenant for regulatory reasons, I'll back it up a couple of times, go and store a set offsite somewhere. And then if I need anything from it, I can restore it into my new tenant. So it gives you a way of actually keeping up your compliance without you actually having to have that tenant fully operational.
That's very cool. I haven't heard about this multi-tenant capability in other solutions. So is this something that, like large companies would leverage for, say, different business units?
Very much so. If you've got, different business units, the mergers and acquisitions pieces, we also find a lot of our managed service partners like this as well, because being able to protect multiple tenants through a single access point reduces the amount of infrastructure and product they have to deploy to go and look after all of their customers. So it actually enables them to consolidate those operations and provide a better service.
Nice. And then you've got on there ultimate air gap, and I know you mentioned that, but can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the ultimate air gap, this is one of the things around backup now, because we have the ransomware impact that's impacting the general kind of production data. They're also now targeting backup solutions to try and wipe those out first. So what they're trying to do is to get rid of all the options for you recovering your data. Because if you don't have any options, you've got to pay the ransom. That's the way they're playing it. So we have to think about things around immutable storage, and do I have another copy of it somewhere else that really can't be accessed? Now, the air gap is the data set. So if it can't be accessed, it can't be fiddled with, it can't be played with. Now, the ultimate air gap solution is, oddly enough, something that we've been using for many, many years, is tape. You write it to tape, you take it out the tape library, you put the right protect tab on it, you put it in a box, and you send it away off-site somewhere. There is no way somebody is going to be able to get into there and encrypt the data sets. It's the ultimate air gap.
Nice. And there's a question here. They're asking about using multiple tenants. Is that typically broken up by business unit, not by user?
Yes, it's business unit really. So it's the larger construct. A tenant will be defined with a certain set of users in it, with its Active Directory elements and all the services around that. So normally it's either a business unit or the acquired company. There are many options that pop out of that one, but it's not a user level thing.
Got it. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm just taking a drink. Right, so let's think about this a little bit more now. Now we've got, the data's coming out. We do some clever things with the data piece as well. We've got some heuristics technology that looks at the data set and starts pulling larger stuff before the smaller stuff. We have some technology in here that gets us around some throttling things too. There are aspects of 365 that are built in particular ways around that. So let's move on to the restore process, because that's what we really want to do. That's why we're protecting it. So how can we restore things? This is the important piece. So granular restoration. Now, somebody asked me that. I think it's was it Bradford here who was asking, do we, there's a self-service piece in there. Are there limits to the granularity and recoverability of some of the Microsoft 365 products? Okay, so this is where it kind of gets kind of nice for me, because this is one of the solutions where I can just keep saying yes to the questions. So if I want to recover things for Exchange Online, I can recover an entire mailbox, an individual email or multiple emails, attachments, calendars, group calendars, and events. So that's just the email piece there. We can even, if you want to, the attachments, we can recover those and put them back into the user's OneDrive, which is kind of neat. If you then want to look at OneDrive, you can protect folders and files. You can recover folders and files individually. You can recover a user's set, a complete OneDrive box, or a group of users and their OneDrive contents. So you could do things in bulk. This starts to solve the solution, about delivering stuff back in bulk. You can be granular, you can be broad. You get to choose. SharePoint. It's quite in depth with SharePoint when you start scratching the surface of what's out there. Sites, subsites, the document library, the page library, and its constructs, events and lists. All of those elements are there in SharePoint, and all the interlinking stuff that we do between users is done as well. So this is where all that complexity, we solve that problem for you too. And then we get into Teams. Chat conversations. We spoke about that earlier. How they're stored, using that exchange technology to go and that system technology to go and move them around for the compliance piece. Files, folders, they're actually attached into Teams via OneDrive. And the interesting last one here, applications. So any Microsoft supported application associated with Teams, we will protect that too. So that's a nice little extra that we've been able to add into there with our technology. And then finally, one of the most important things is your Azure AD. Now we can recover users, we can recover groups and groups of users, and also their service principals. The service principals are effectively the privileges that are assigned to users. Now we do this at a relatively high level. If you want to really get down underneath, down and dirty into the objects, like the cloud-only object recovery, if you want to get finite, then we have another product called Quest On-Demand Recovery for Active Directory. It's very fabulous. It works in conjunction with NetVault as well. They will coexist. So if you want to do massive bulk, you can. If you want to do kind of little object twiddly things that have got messed up, you can use the on-demand solution. So single vendor, you can use those two side by side, and you've pretty much got Active Directory covered as best as you'll ever find. So lots of things out there that we can add. It's very, very, very granular in its method of recovery too. So hopefully, Bradford, that actually helps with that solution.
And then, Adrian, I'm curious, when it comes to Teams, I've heard of backup and data protection solutions that back it up, but when it comes to restoration, it doesn't go back exactly in the same form. Like you might get some data in a CSV file or a PDF or something like that. When NetVault backs this up and then restores it, does it go back to the
Mhm.
same place it came from?
Oh yeah, in the same constructs too. So we rebuilt the team, the conversations, everything. Yeah,
Nice,
yeah.
nice.
It's that's a big differentiator. Yes, a lot of people say these files just come out as files, or I'll get chat as HTML. What am I supposed to do with that? But no, we rebuild it,
Excellent.
which is kind of neat. And then on top of that, we also have an Elasticsearch technology with NetVault. So you can search across all of this content. So you can search for things like in mail, the sender and recipient of the title. You can search for file names and folder names and users. So documents as well. So you've got the ability to search everything, and of course, not forgetting that when you do find something, if you want to rename it or relocate it or both of those to a different area, a different user, a different tenant, you have that ability too. So you can actually move things around where you want to. So if somebody's left and somebody's asks for their OneDrive files, you'd go, okay, well, I can recover what we have and I can relocate it back to that person that's requesting it. And it just drops into their OneDrive piece. So super easy. All right. So we've got into deployment options. Right, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of things now. So I've got three kind of examples of how you can use this technology. I think we just got a little bit of time. I'll whiz through this pretty quickly. So option one, you have all your content inside your tenant, and we have a Microsoft 365 access point that allows us to actually use that Graph API, go and talk to the applications, and allow us to extract the data out. So data target, well, this is where the other half of NetVault Plus comes into it. When you buy NetVault Plus, you get the NetVault backup software. You also get the award-winning core store deduplication solution as well. That all comes part of it. And what that allows us to do is you can have multiple options where you want to send your data. So this particular deployment method, I've got core store actually running in Azure as well, in the same tenant. And we can even use Azure Blob storage as its back end. So we really kind of keep the cost of storage down low. We get up to anything up to 20 to 1 deduplication. So you start to reduce the storage costs as well. So we go and access control content, we pull content out, and then we save it down. And when we save it down from that access point down to core store, we get source side deduplication. So that means that if we've already got data blocks we match stored, we just don't send them again. So it starts to reduce data movement costs, especially if you're going to egress data out, because a lot of people want to do that. They want it on a different platform that's not Azure. So options around that, well, if you want to, you can just go and run core store somewhere else and send it somewhere else. And we have service providers doing that. We have customers doing this as well. If they want to bring it on premise, they can have the storage on premise and run everything else up in the cloud and just move the data down. So we use a technology we have called Secure Connect, which wraps up that data movement in a secure socket layer as well. So that allows us to move it over a WAN securely, as well as being encrypted at rest when it lands on core store. And if you want to go a little bit further, you can also then tier that older data off and put it up into just anybody's cloud storage pretty much. So I've listed a few there. What we've got there: Wasabi, Amazon S3, you can use Glacier 2, Google Cloud, IBM, and obviously if you want to go and use another Azure thing, you can if you so wish. So now you've got a long-term retention thing actually sorted out. Instead of using the retention settings within 365 where the data is full size, well, why not deduplicate it, compress it, then store it in a cloud storage somewhere that you can keep it for 7 years or whatever you want to do. It's a lot more cost effective. And if you want to have another copy of things, because we like having copies of data, the 3-2-1 rule for backup, that second piece, Core Store has replication technology inside there, and we can actually replicate from one Core Store instance to another. So I've got two copies, one in the cloud, one in my on-premises site, my colo, another tenant, or a service provider. Take your pick. So we can actually off-site stuff too. Let's look at another methodology. Oh, well, I'll just add that last bit in there. If you want to do the ultimate air gap as well, in comes your tape. So next scenario here. Same content we're going to protect, put an access point, control the data, go and pull the data out, and then move it out to my core store instance and then out to tape if I so wish. So if you want to have the tape in the core store instance, a bit like we've just already seen in a single methodology, very straightforward. And notice I've now got the backup server is on premise and just a little client with my access point, like a proxy server. In effect, that's where the Graph API technology sits and pulls the data. So that's the most efficient method, because as soon as that data comes into that client, when it comes out again, we get source side deduplication, reduce the amount of data being egressed, reduces your costs, and then we store it and deduplicate it further. And then you can do whatever you want with it, off the cloud, off the tape, wherever you want to move it next. Final deployment option, last one. This is one, oddly enough, is quite common, where people want to have everything on their premises. I go and talk to it, I go and pull my data back, and I'm going to go and store it in core store tape off the client. Now, this is great, it's fine, it'll work. The only caveat to this is the reason that the data coming back is red is because my access point isn't next to the data, so I'm not going to get source side deduplication until it arrives at my premises. So your egress costs are going to be a bit more. So just things to consider. However, it's a valid methodology without any question around that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the flexibility of deployment. The other side of NetVault as well. Sorry, yes, David, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, I know we're starting to run out of time here, but just quickly on the different architectural options there, any recommendations for where to choose the best place to store your offsite data to get it out of Microsoft 365?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can do that with Core Store, with part of the NetVault Plus solution. Depending on where you want to run that, that's where you can move the data out. I would recommend wholeheartedly having that access point in Azure to actually reduce the data coming out if you're going to move data out of Azure. But you could run Core Store in AWS. You could run it anywhere else. If you want to cloud tier directly out, if you're running Core Store inside Azure, maybe you want to say, I want to keep my longer term stuff out in another cloud storage, push it out to Wasabi, for example. That's all automated. So you can actually tier out that as the data gets older and moves out somewhere else. And because it's going to cloud storage already deduplicated and compressed and encrypted, it's secure and it's as small as you can make it. So it's going to reduce your costs too. So best practice, the only thing I would say is get the access point close to the data. And if you want to have the storage somewhere else, it's kind of wherever you want to put it, pretty much.
Nice. I like that flexibility.
Yeah. Right, I've got just the one more slide after this. So as I said right at the beginning, NetVault Plus is a broad solution. Not only, we focused on Microsoft 365 today. However, if you actually wanted to actually do some more with it, you think, actually, I could do with some other kind of technologies looking after, or we cover an awful lot with this product. We'll look after VMware virtual machines, Hyper-V and Nutanix, and also Linux virtualization stacks. We talked to storage stuff from Dell and NetApp. We've talked about the Azure pieces and AWS today, and Wasabi as well, the cloud bits in there. Operating systems, loads of stuff. So all the Microsoft stack as you'd expect. And you get into the kind of the more enterprisey stuff with things like AIX, Oracle Linux, lots of that out there, CentOS, Red Hat, Ubuntu. We even do Mac OS as well. If we have quite a few people in the creative industries that require that, and Solaris is still there too. Then we get into the applications beyond what we've spoken about today with Microsoft 365, SQL Server, the traditional Exchange, SAP HANA, Oracle databases, DB2. You can kind of read the list there. So there's an awful lot that you can do with NetVault as well. So from the agent list-based backups of virtual machines to very fine granular stuff with databases, it pretty much covers everything you'd be looking for. So if you started with Microsoft 365, solve those problems, the NetVault, you can look at it and say, what else can I solve with this technology? There's an awful lot it's going to do for you. I think that just about rounds us out. So if you want to learn more about the solution, there's a little URL there, or if you're like me, it's easier to go and snap that QR code and that will take you off to that particular website as well.
Excellent. Great presentation, Adrian. As always, I love the QR code there as well. I encourage everyone to get out their mobile device and take a little picture of that, and you can go visit quest.com, over to the NetVault website, and try out this solution for yourself. Adrian, can you tell us a little bit more about exactly how that works?
Sure, you can head out there. You can actually download the software to use. The NetVault technology, all of its technology, will run for 30 days without any kind of issue. There's no nothing's turned off or defeatured. You get everything, and you can also download Core Store. And if you want to go and try it, I recommend you download a virtual machine image, or if you want to spin up a virtual machine image in Azure, you can do that as well. It's in the Azure Marketplace. But if you pull down the virtual machine, you run it on VMware or something, or Hyper-V, it comes with a terabyte license that's community edition. That's free forever. So you can keep that and use that to whatever. Core Store integrates very, very tightly with NetVault, that NetVault Plus solution, but it does work with other backup solutions too. So if you were looking at consolidating your backup storage across multiple backup solutions, Core Store will help out with that as well.
Nice. So you don't have to replace your current backup solution to get started with Core Store and start, taking advantage of what it can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. There's a number of good questions here. We'll probably just have time for a few before our webinar time slot here is over. But let's see. First one I see from Steve. He's asking, do we need a certain level of Microsoft licenses to be able to leverage this solution?
You shouldn't do. I'm not aware that the Graph API is restrictive on basis of the actual tenant. I'm not, as you can probably hear, I'm not overly sure about that. I mean, you can go and find out what your tenant, what you're buying includes, but if it's got full Graph API, that's it. That's all you need.
Okay. And then to install the trial, on premises, I assume there's some sort of hardware requirements.
You can run them in virtual machines if you want to trial it out. That's fine. Again, if you want that access point up in Azure, create a little virtual machine, little Windows machine, install the NetVault client, the plugin for Microsoft 365 on that. Run up the NetVault server. You could do the same in Azure if you wanted to. If you want to throw the machines away afterwards, you could spin that machine up, make those two talk, add them in, add in Core Store, and then go and configure to go and pick up the data. So it's fairly straightforward. All the user guides are available as well, so you can go and use that, and how to install, how to configure, how to set up. It's all available.
Excellent. And then there's a couple of questions here from, let's see, one from Chris, one from Jennifer, asking about kind of the licensing model for NetVault Plus. Is it a subscription model, and is it modular? Like, do you buy different, editions or packages to, protect one piece of Microsoft 365 versus another? How does that work?
Right. So the Microsoft 365 is a subscription per user. Simple as that. The rest of NetVault Plus, if you're doing with other things, it's capacity based. But we actually have a package for Microsoft 365 which just concentrates on that. So if that's where you want to focus, we deliver that as a subscription per user. If you want to have the rest of the solution, we do offer subscription, term license, permanent as well. So you've got all the license options available in many ways to actually buy the solution and make it work with your budget and your methodology.
Excellent. I love the flexibility there of the model. So it looks like we're running out of time here in the hour, and I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. We've got, looks like 40 questions for you there still, Adrian. Maybe you can get back to some of those folks. Obviously, a lot of interest, a lot of excitement about this solution, and concern around protecting and filling these gaps in Microsoft 365. Adrian,
Yep.
It's always great having you on. Thank you so much.
It's been great to be here once again, David.
And of course, thank you to our friends at Quest. I want to encourage everyone out there to, check out the QR code there on the screen, visit that URL, check out the handouts that are available there for additional information in your audience console. You can just download those PDFs now and access them after the event. And then I'll leave up that QR code if you want to check it out while I announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to Kari Shiver from California. Congratulations. Kari
Yay.
Shiver from California will also be reaching out to our Best Question prize winner after the event. Thank you to everyone who joined us on the webinar today. I hope that you learned a lot, and I hope that you have a great day.